Hello everybody, I'm AeroFade.
And I'm TinyPirate.
And today we have 5 top tips for dealing with your traffic congestion problems in Cities Skylines. But because analysing and solving traffic problems can be so complex, today's episode is a little bit special. First, we're going to give you 5 tips for diagnosing your traffic problems, and then 5 great tips for fixing the traffic problems you discover. That's 10 tips for the price of 5. But wait, there's more. We're also going to intersperse the analysis and tips with examples from a real city beset by traffic problems. This will help you see these tips in action and deployed against a live problem. And hey, if you enjoy seeing us fix cities, let us know in the comments below and we'll make some more City Fix-It episodes. On with the show. Now before you can fix a congestion problem in Skylines, you need to understand it. We're going to figure out where our traffic problems lie by answering 5 key questions. And once we understand this problem, we'll apply 5 fixes for getting our city moving again. Analysis of your traffic problem starts with pausing the game and studying your traffic map. This leads to our first diagnosis question. Where are the immediate problems? Now, a quick pointer, red doesn't necessarily indicate a problem. It could be that there's simply a lot of traffic flowing through the area. But if you see an area of red, and traffic is stationary and backed up, then you have a problem. The same is true for backed up trains. Let's see how TinyPirate applies the first diagnosis tip to a real city.
Thanks, AeroFade. Let's look at the city of Lakewood by Zeeterm. If we open the traffic overlay, we can see that there are immediately some pretty heavy congestion areas throughout the city. Freeway exits are frequently pretty slow. This big roundabout in the middle of town, extremely congested. And same goes for this roundabout over here. 2 big bottlenecks. Down here I've noticed that the shipping container ports produce a lot of traffic. Most of it heading through this strange sort of collection of, I don't know, roads? Spaghetti? Over to industrial areas like over here. But the good news is that despite all this congestion, I do think this is a solvable problem.
Here's your second diagnosis question. Where is your traffic trying to flow to and from? Let's recall how traffic flows through a city. 1. Your industry and commercial zones will import goods from off the map. 2. Your resource industries will send goods to factories for processing. 3. Your industries will send finished goods to commercial zones. And 4. Your residents will move about between their homes, school, work and shopping. With all of that in mind, what type of traffic are we seeing at the congestion points?
Before we get into the particular problems of this map, let's talk about how we might conduct the analysis. Although it's possible to spend time clicking on traffic and spotting individual vehicles and figuring out where they're going and where they've come from, and even following some of them, it's far quicker to use a mod to help you with this. My favourite is the traffic report tool, which when you click on a vehicle or a road will tell you the vehicle's origin, its destination. We'll be using this mod to speed things up a bit. What about those troublesome roundabouts? First troublesome roundabout, where are you all going? Some traffic here is just going off to service offices, off to service other offices off there, and a fair amount of it coming from down here. This crossing over here. Traffic flowing from residential to offices, industrial areas servicing commercial and office space. Industry over here could be causing us some problems. A lot of industry at this side, not much road access. That's going to be a lot of trucks travelling from this area through the residential areas probably to perhaps commercial areas or to other industrial areas or off the map.
The third diagnosis question. Do you have a great public transport network? Roads can only handle so much traffic, no matter how well you design them. So you're going to need to ensure that there's ample public transport available for your residents to get around on. We're talking buses, the subway, trains and even footpaths, and if you can afford it, change your policies to make all public transport free. You'll notice a huge effect on the number of vehicles using your roads. If all of your residents are using buses and the underground, then you could be taking hundreds of cars off the road every week.
Right, so let's talk about public transport. Having a look at the bus routes here, I can immediately see a few problems. The first one is that, well, there just really aren't enough bus routes in this map, in the city. Here, there are a fair few bus routes, but they don't really focus on the train stations, on the subway stations, which would be really helpful. A hub and spoke system of using your buses to deliver people to the closest train station, and then the people then use the underground or the trains to get across town is probably the best way of setting things up. It's certainly the most easiest to imagine, so that could perhaps be something we look at fixing. Uptown here, not a great deal of bus routes for quite a busy urban area. And across here, some in some parts, nothing in other parts. And what's interesting is over here we've got two big buildings, two big attractive tourist generating buildings. No real way for people to get to them except perhaps by car. Not going to be too helpful. In this little suburb, a single bus route services half of it, but not all of it. And perhaps more frustratingly for the poor old civilians here, this station is not serviced by a bus route. And if you look, it's not even that easy for the citizens to get here by foot. In fact, I don't think it's possible for them to walk. So citizens have to drive to get to the mass transit, and then from there, of course, they can hop on a train. You don't really want them driving here. You want them to be able to hop on buses if possible. Having a look at the tube lines, I can see that quite a few have been laid out, but there are some obvious gaps which are missing trains. For example, no subway stop. Would seem quite an obvious one. Probably even do with two. And over here, these two really big areas have pretty much two stops between them. Don't really count these two as separate ones. They're so close together. It seems that quite a lot of work could be done to optimize the subway routes here. When we're thinking about mass transit, we should also think about the places that people will want to use their mass transit to get to. So the obvious ones are your attractions. No bus routes to get you to those locations though. Definitely something to look at. One people forget about is the universities. So having a look at the bus routes. There is a bus route which does not stop at the university, except on the other side. A single bus route doesn't stop right here. A little bit better serviced. And as you can see, there are a vast number of students who want to go home. 3,800 students in the city going to university. None of them can easily get there by mass transit. The rest of the attractions, not ideally served either. One thing I am quite concerned about is that there is no way for the citizens of Lakewood to easily get across these extremely long avenues in the north of town. In fact, you can see hordes of civilians running up and down these streets trying to look for a way to cross, but being good citizens they won't jaywalk. So instead they run the whole length of these avenues, maybe looking for a bus, maybe looking for a train station, maybe just lost and confused, until eventually they get to an intersection and cross at the crosswalk there. This is something that you really need to think about when you're building your city. There's not really any great use of paths in this city either. You have some really big areas where we see shopping and residential and what have you quite close together, but there's not really any way for people to get to them by foot. If you give people a footpath, they will use it. For example, residential areas here might want to visit the high density commercial over there. It's really close. They can't really walk it. These motorway roundabouts, which are great because they're one way and you want one way roundabouts, don't allow people to walk around the edges. There's no footpaths, so yeah, they are forced to drive their cars. We definitely need to think about providing more intersections, providing more footpaths, giving our people the chance to get around the city.
The fourth question, do you have an intersection density problem? Because if you do, you need to space out your intersections. Yes, this tip comes up a lot. It's even on the load screen, but it's really, really important. The more intersections you have near each other, the more bumper-to-bumper action you're gonna get. Take a good hard look at your traffic problem and look for those intersections that are slowing everything down.
So let's look now at the density of the intersections and have a think about whether they're causing any problems. One thing I've noticed is that, well, when you look at this roundabout, there are multiple entrances and exits, which cause things to slow down. As you can see here, there's traffic slowing to wait for these guys to move on, to wait for these guys to move on. So, see that in quite a few locations, and in some places, very, very close traffic on two-way streets. If this was a one-way street going perhaps just off the main road, things would flow a lot easier. And likewise, this main boulevard, it's a two-way boulevard. Would it be easier one way all the way up here, across to here, and then perhaps one way all the way back down? Another area that gets a lot of traffic and sees a lot of intersections is this insane waterfront. I'm kind of jealous, actually. I mean, look at this thing. It is so impressive. It's also got this kind of science-defying train car crossing thing. I don't know how the game allowed him to build this. You'll have to let us into your magic, Zeeterm. Look at that. It's so amazing. I don't really think that this mess of roads across the river is a problem. At least, it's not one that I propose fixing because, oh my goodness. That's kind of really tough. But it is pretty interesting to look at.
And our final question. Are your cargo trains and shipping ports handy to your industrial and commercial zones? Cargo trains will carry a lot of goods for you and can substantially reduce the cross-map traffic between industrial, commercial and off-map locations. If you don't have a good cargo train network, you can seriously clog your roads with trucks importing and exporting goods.
So looking at the cargo trains and the mass transit for industrial goods, well, we've had a bit of a chat about the problem here with this cargo ship dumping vast quantities of traffic onto the roads. But there's also a few issues, I think, with the train network. Primarily that we have these stations scattered around. They are used, but they're not exactly particularly convenient for a lot of the people who might want to use them. Neither the pedestrians, due to a lack of any other kind of public transport to get them close to the trains, nor the cargo ships or cargo trains, because, for example, that industrial area we identified over here, yes, there is a terminal that will crop up here, but I mean, this road is already jammed. In other places you can see the train routes are getting pretty clogged up. There's no real option for a bypass, so we're seeing trains forced to wait, let each other through, that kind of thing. So we have passenger routes here, clearly getting in the way of cargo trains and vice versa. This happens at a few locations around the map. Let's not even discuss this part. And I'm kind of thinking that there definitely needs to be a bit of work here to give the trains a few more options. Give them a few bypasses to get past the busiest intersections. And to have a bit of a think about how cargo is flowing, perhaps fixing up some of these disparities between where our cargo ships get in, where our cargo trains are departing from, might make sense to bring them a bit closer together somehow.
Now that we've run through the diagnosis questions, we can look through 5 fixes to solve the congestion problems. The 5 fixes we want to look at are: 1. Using one-way streets to reduce the traffic at intersections. 2. Expand the routes between your industrial, commercial zones and off-map accesses. 3. Expand your public transport networks. Be sure to provide effective public transport to tourist and educational facilities. 4. Improve your cargo train network. 5. Don't be afraid of breaking out the bulldozers. If there are zones causing traffic problems, it might be easier to simply knock them down. Let's see how TinyPirate applies these fixes to Lakewood.
I've applied the 5 fixes we suggested earlier. First of all, one-way roads. On the map you can see arrows indicating the one-way roads that currently exist thanks to the one-way road mod by Electrian. In the centre of town, one-way roads now dominate the entrances and exits to this roundabout. And in Uptown here, I have created one-way roads that zigzag back and forth across the avenues of town. This has given traffic a lot more options when it comes to crossing town, and I think has aided the reduction of congestion here. I've also pretty extensively reworked parts of town to provide industry and commercial areas more access to transport. Over in the port area, I've thrown in a roundabout. If in doubt, roundabout. And that seems to have largely resolved the traffic problems in this vicinity. In other places I've added new routes to significantly reduce the bottleneck pressures. This bridge here was particularly troublesome, but now I have other routes by which traffic can get across town. I've also improved and updated access to the freeways from the other sides of town, because I noticed that a lot of traffic was cross town through these busy side streets here, and I figured that perhaps some more freeway access would encourage traffic to go around. In the south, I've increased the number of accesses for traffic to coming on and off the freeway to get into this bedroom suburb. This has reduced congestion at one of the key intersections here, which has helped smooth things along quite nicely. Public transport has been significantly enhanced through the addition of extra bus routes, as well as new train stations. I've even thrown in a train station here for passengers coming off the ferry to get straight onto the subway network. I've also put in bus routes that cross all the major attractions as well as the universities, and in other places I've just added more routes to give more options. So while there were, for example in this area, quite a lot of up, down, north-south routes, there weren't that many going east-west, so I chucked in a few of those. I've added extensively to the walkway network, including adding walkways across the river, adding to this fantastic mess that is the wonderful river transport network. Across the whole of the map I've thrown in walkways connecting any spare bit of green grass, crossing any spare bit of motorway or roundabout, and as you can see they're pretty heavily used by the locals in this town. Our fourth tip was to improve your cargo train network, and I've done that very practically by placing a cargo train station right in the middle of town. I noticed that there was a lot of cargo coming in from the outskirts of town, so, well, perhaps I figure if they have a cargo terminal right in the centre of town, there'll be less trips that cross the borders and clog up the fringes of the city. I think this has worked pretty well, and hey, laying a cargo train network across the streets of a town is pretty entertaining in itself. In addition to that, I've placed extensive rail back routes so that trains can quite easily slip past otherwise busy bottlenecks. This hasn't been the prettiest of examples, but it is quite functional. And let's really not talk about this example. In some cases, I simply connected different sides of the map together with rails that were previously not connected, hopefully reducing the kind of cross-town rail traffic that might otherwise have slowed things down. Our final tip was to break out the bulldozer, and I've done that in the case of the wonderful little industrial suburb up here, which was polluting so much ground, turning it instead into residential. This has helped quite a lot in reducing the number of trucks travelling across this area. Around the roundabout, I have reduced the number of entrances and exits to it, speeding up traffic flow, and I've also used the bulldozer to quite simply delete routes that were causing trouble. For example, there was an off-ramp from this rather raised freeway here that was sending dozens of trucks into the middle of downtown, causing all kinds of bottlenecks further on. This has been deleted, much reducing the amount of traffic in this vicinity. Not sure where the traffic is going now, but it isn't causing any problems, so that's a great relief. How's traffic looking now? Well, if I turn on the traffic overlay, you can see greatly reduced red spots in the vicinity of the docks. The two roundabouts themselves are much heavily reduced in the amount of congestion, and not much congestion in the southern area either. There are probably a fair few more tweaks one could make to really improve the efficiency of this town, but I'm pretty happy with the fix we've completed so far. I've been TinyPirate.
And I've been AeroFade. If you have some tips, we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment down below. Don't forget to subscribe to see more Skylines content. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you later.